So we've talked a lot about boards and CEOs. Now we're going to talk about the operational roles that sit around an executive team. And for that, I'd like to invite both Sven and Ellen, who are both colleagues. Sven runs technology for us at Egon Zehnder. Ellen does all the private equity and VC portfolio. We've got also Justin, who is the CTO of, used to be the CTO of GE Capital, also ran his own business, and he's about to work as a CTO of Leonteq, which is one of the most complicated and powerful derivative platform. And we've got Daniel Waterhouse from Balderton. He's a general partner. He's invested in Rolly, Lovecrafts, Tictal Thread, and before that he was a partner at Wellington Partners, where he invested in Y-Plan, Halo, Bookatable, and Readmeal, which then sold out to Dropbox. So if you guys can join me, that'd be great. So Mark, we'll put you in the middle next over there. That's okay. No, yeah, perfect, perfect. Sven and Ellen, great. Thank you, Ellen. Okay, Dan, let's start with you. We've talked a lot. We're going to put you in the hot spot. We talked a lot about CEOs and founders, but one of the other big roles is CFOs, right? Whether you need a certain type of CFO to raise debt or go for an exit. I mean, what's your view on that function sitting around the executive team?
I mean, it hugely depends on the business, but ultimately it comes down to the complexity in business model, in the amount of interactions you have with different people in the market, but then also how fast you're growing. And you know, the role of the CFO is really important one is, of course, getting the accounts done and making sure you are on top of all of that, but as a kind of check and balance for the CEO, someone who's a little bit more balanced and maybe not as mad as an entrepreneur, who is that kind of sane sounding board for the CEO, who says, hang on a second, you know, maybe we haven't thought this through a bit, or hang on a second, if we do that we're going to run out of money, or hang on a second, we should really be making sure we change our systems because our business is getting much more complicated, and if we don't, we're going to lose any insight into how it works. And what the point that happens really is completely dependent on the type of business, how fast they're growing, and complexity. But a lot of companies get the timing too late because they don't quite see 2 steps ahead, especially if it's a first-time founding team and they haven't really gone through this. They'll often not see 2 steps ahead, and they should have invested in finance sooner. And then it hits them, and they've lost all kind of insider control over the business, and it turns into a bit of a mayhem. So it's one of the things actually a board can be super helpful on for, is trying to educate a team on that sequencing piece.
Okay. And Ellen, I mean, just when you think about CFOs in general, do you think that role is the co-CEO leader? I mean, do you think that the CFOs have even more influence than the rest of the management team, especially in early stages where you're worried about run rate, you're worried about investment, you're worried about, am I going to survive the next 2-3 weeks and keep alive? I mean, do you think that role is even the second most important role in the management team or not?
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if everybody hear me. I think if you get the right CFO, it really is, as Daniel said, that business partner to the CEO who provides that counterweight. And I think often they feel relieved to now finally have someone who can help them in their strategic planning, thinking about the future, dare I say, maybe adding a bit of a reality check. So, we're clearly not looking for the accountant, the bean counter. We're looking for someone who can really be that partner and fill that role. Without as we go into the mistakes, the screw up, or as I say, originally we said the fuck ups, but we're being very politically correct here. Also, it can be tempting to go into a CFO that's really, really big and has some fantastic brand names to his or her name, of much larger corporates, but doesn't have that sort of agility to deal with the daily, changes in a fast-growing company. So it's not always that straightforward to get it right.
Great. And just from a technology perspective, of course, the CFO holds the purse. They're going to have to make different decisions on where to put that money. Am I going to hire more people, or am I going to put that money behind technology? I mean, coming from a technology perspective, what's your experience so far been with that function?
Well, for any aspiring CFOs, give the technology people everything they want.
Yeah. That's a defiant answer. I'm going to cut you off now.
No, well, I'll make a slightly different point. One of the experiences that I've had is that very often the control that a CFO requires in an early stage means that responsibility for the spending of the cash, for the burning of the cash, is not actually given to people in the organization. And so it's very often the case where people don't really understand, except at a senior level, exactly how money's been spent. And so when you then go back into an organization and you say, look, guys, we really have to keep it tight on expenses, people have no real sense of what you're talking about, because they don't really understand the cash flow themselves. And so one of my experiences is give people responsibility for a part of the investment that you are managing, so that they can see the results that come from it, so that they can see the impact of bad decisions. And that builds responsibility in the company, which you will need as it continues to grow.
And Sven, I mean, obviously you do all of the technology. I mean, what's been your kind of market view around the level of investment behind technology to scale a business? I mean, what's been the good things that you've seen and the not so great that you've seen in that whole space?
I do all the technology, that's right.
I'm trying to pump
look,
you
there
up
are various
Sven.
ways of cutting it. I think to stay with the topic of screw-ups, I mean, I see, first of all, I see that the technology function is like the key pain point for both in growth, but also more established companies. It's the one thing that I feel most of the other functions, including the CEO and the board, really worry about. So the scope for error is quite high, and I think that what I see in the market is either people are, the C-suite, if you want, is misaligned around what they're really looking for in the technology function, or there is a lot of alignment behind the wrong spec. And that's something that we try to cut through in a way, and working very closely with our clients to understand really what's the reality check against the market, and is what you want, does it actually really exist? But I think more often than not, we see that too many people within the company talk about different things and are not aligned behind what they really need for technology in it. But I guess the investment level question is, I try to answer by saying, in general, people are very willing to put a lot of money behind technology talent.
Okay. Daniel, if you have X number of money you have to choose between hiring an amazing CFO and an amazing CTO, which way would you go?
I'm going to cop out. Look, it does,
And you can't say a bit of both.
well, it does. I mean, in the founding part of a company,
Yeah,
it's
sure.
a CTO every time, right? You know, there's no point having a CFO if you haven't got a product, and a product that someone's willing to pay for in some fashion. And of course, that's not the only role of the CFO, but it's a big part of it early on. You know, later on, God, who knows? I mean, I think it's going to hugely depend on the type of business and what sort of state they're in. You know, one of the common themes in any of the functional areas of the business as a company grows is how they upgrade both the talent and the systems and processes in the organization to be suitable for not today, but probably 6 months or 12 months down the line. You can't go too far, otherwise you'll be overreaching. And so the answer to the question is going to be in which areas of the business do you do the worst job historically. That means you've got to sort it out quick.
Okay. And so from your experience, because you've worked both big blue chip and smaller startup, we've talked about CFOs, we've talked about CTOs.
Mm-hmm.
What other, especially, your spike is B2B software.
Mm-hmm.
What other critical roles are you seeing, companies really invest behind and sort of scaling? What other functions?
Yeah, well, something that was a real surprise for me coming from GE was just beginning to understand the role of the software salesperson. You know, I'd always been the CTO on the other side of the table, telling them that they were crazy and there's no way I was going to pay that much. But understanding it from the other side was a significant lesson for me, and something that I learned in the process was you have to be very careful that the sales talent that you hire is aligned with the values of the product that you are trying to sell. So a lot of software organizations will hire very experienced salespeople from a very traditional environment, and particularly in a software startup where, frankly, the chances of you ending up where you started with the same vision of a company is almost zero, right? you will be tagging and zigging and zagging through the landscape and working out where the product fit is and where the market fit is. So because of that, you need a salesperson who can really adjust to that environment and pivot themselves in terms of how they operate as salespeople. And so I've seen organizations really battle with salespeople who couldn't make that transition, who were fantastic at selling vacuum cleaners or whatever it happened to be, but when it comes to selling software that is still being born, right, it requires a slightly different skill set. And so I would recommend that you put a sales leader, a VP of sales, or somebody like that through their change paces to make sure that they're the kind of person who is not just going to use the same playbook that they've been using for the last 10, 20 years.
So Ellen, we've talked about, as Mark said, many different functions, sales, we've talked about...
We haven't talked about the screw-ups yet.
Well, that's what I'm getting to.
Good.
So now that we've got the management team, right, I want to know what are the biggest groups that you've seen happen.
I'm going to defer that one to Daniel, actually, because I want to hear it from up close and personal.
I don't know where to start. I mean,
Well, you're passing on the buck to him now, but I want to hear your screw-ups.
Okay.
And then Daniel, you're next.
So I think one of the most difficult things is if you're as a shareholder, let's take the CFO as an example, right? It's crucial to you. This guy's going to help you manage the cost, manage the CEO, help you fundraise the next. So you really... have probably a very clear idea of what you want or what you're looking for, but the team also needs to buy into this person, right? So it's that delicate balance of influencing and, cajoling and roping in early on that, particularly with the founder, that he or she thinks, that it's also his or her idea and really, embraces this person, because he or she can be so fantastic, but if they don't get sort of the support from within, they're going to crash and burn.
Daniel, your mistake, or your kind of learnings or mistakes?
I'm going to do a generic one, I think. I mean, there's definitely lots of point solutions, but the generic one is that the CEO or the board or whoever's doing the hiring thinks of a role in isolation or a department in isolation, says, sales isn't working, we're going to hire a new VP sales. Finance is getting more complicated, we're going to hire a CFO. And then they just think about hiring the CFO and the spec for that and forget about the broader organization. And the point is that the CEO and other execs should be constantly paranoid and constantly thinking about how does this affect the rest of the organization? How does it affect the company's culture? How does it affect the people who are currently doing some of that role as they hand it off? It's a really complex, nuanced thing. And what a lot of startups do is run as fast as they can, hire people as fast as they can, chuck them into different roles, make them managers, and they've got no managerial experience, and then bring a C-level person above them who doesn't know how to work in a startup, has no idea how to manage someone who doesn't know how to manage the person behind them, and the whole thing descends into chaos.
That sounds pretty grim.
It is.
Listen, we started a bit late, so I'm gonna go back around the table here and just, if you can give the audience one or two pieces of advice on some of the mistakes that you've seen and what to avoid. So should we start with you?
Sure.
Shoot.
So hire people that have the values that you want, not the values that you necessarily have. Because your company will change. It will evolve strategically, the product hopefully will evolve, and you need to have people who are aligned to the values that you want to get to rather than the values that you perhaps came from. You see this a lot in companies in the software space that come from an open source kind of world, and when they start to move up towards the chasm and they want to start being big commercial operators, it's a completely different value set, and some people battle to make the transition.
Ellen?
I think for me it will be pipeline. I mean, all of you will meet people and network the whole time and maybe just move on. But I think try, whenever you meet someone, sort of almost earmark them and think, if I ever come have a company XYZ, he'd be good for that. And if you're even more disciplined, you make a little note on your iPhone so that you build that pipeline, because we find that our clients often call us when it's almost too late. And had they thought ahead and developed that pipeline and pulled someone in, it would have been flying much earlier.
Daniel?
A bit related to my last point, but I would say hire within 1 or 2 degrees of difference to the existing members of the team. So hire someone who is better and more progressed than the person they're replacing, but don't hire someone who is 20 years progressed, because you'll have a massive culture clash, and that doesn't work.
And Sven, final words of the entire panel, no pressure.
Yeah, I'll narrow it down. I can't make the general statement, but in the technology function, I call it the unfortunate function, because in today's world you have to be the brain surgeon in the room as well as the manager of a hospital chain, is my analogy. So know where you are on that spectrum. You know, do you want that sharp tool that sorts out a specific technology issue in your company, or do you want somebody who can align with the team and work together with everybody to solve it? And people are on that axis somewhere, but that's where I see most mistakes, that where's the alignment and what is it you really need?
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time, everybody, and we appreciate your attendance as well.